generally like stuff that's bassy means it's pretty big. You know, like dinosaurs would probably have produced a lot of bass when they're walking around. A tree falling down, hitting the earth generally produces a lot of bass frequencies, you know? It's like generally stuff that is producing like large amounts of bass is either like a giant problem or just like something that you should be in awe of because it's massive. And, you know, I think that's probably why it has that kind of effect on humans maybe.
So here we are with Mr. Bill. Mr. Bill, so glad to have you on here. How you doing today?
Good, man. How are you?
Not bad. So for everyone out there listening, Mr. Bill here, he's a legendary bass music, electronic music producer. He also has his own podcast. He also has lessons on his website for producers. To start this off, I'd love to talk about your take on darkness in art.
Darkness in art. I mean, I guess isn't that, it's kind of subjective, isn't it? Like as to what is seen as dark and not. I think like in general we all agree that like stuff that's written in minor keys and stuff that is sort of more subdued in terms of the frequency spectrum is generally heard to be darker, and stuff that is kind of more bright and glissy and, you know, sounds like chimes and shit and like has a bunch of major notes in the scales is seen to be like lighter and brighter. Yeah, I mean, I think they can both be used in interesting ways, and I think they both should be used. You know, I think art needs a lot of contrast for it to be interesting. I don't know if that was kind of a non-answer, but
I'm curious, like, if things like death or anger motivate and inspire you as an artist.
Oh, gotcha. I mean, I suppose like I went through that phase a little bit when I was younger, doing like I came from sort of like a metal background, and I used to be like, yeah, you know, fucking angry and like, let's go. And now I'm just kind of a little bit more, I don't know, like chill about shit. It doesn't really, yeah. I mean, I also like have suffered from depression for a long time, and there's been a lot of times where I've been like, oh man, you know, like I'm feeling like not like, you know, suicidal or anything necessarily, but like just like really down, you know, and like fuck life, like what's the point kind of thing. Like maybe I guess nihilistic is the word. And that has inspired me a little bit in the past, I suppose. Like I've written some, you know, IDM-y sort of down tempo-y, like more of the sadder sounding stuff in my catalog in those states, versus, you know, if I'm like super happy and hyped on something, like I might be writing more of a banger or so, like more something like a dance anthem kind of thing or something.
For someone who has a large creative output like yourself, I'm just curious, like how you know, stay, you know, relatively consistent or you don't, and just what it's like creating when you're just in the wrong headspace.
Well, I mean, I kind of look at what I do with my music writing as like quote unquote work. I don't, you know, necessarily be like, oh, this is a job and this sucks. You know, like I look at it just as like, this is what I do. This is this is just what I do. Right. And so when I'm feeling shitty, I'm like, you know, I don't necessarily want to go to work, but I have to. It's like just something that I feel like I have to do. And generally, I mean, this is a bad example for me to make because I'm terrible at going to the gym, but I feel like it's one of those things where, you know, if you like force yourself to do exercise, you'll just feel better. You know, it's just, there's no time in my life where I've ever done exercise and after it I've been like, that sucked, I wish I didn't do that. You know, like every single time I've exercised in my life ever, I've always been like, that was a good idea, I feel good after that, right? And I feel like the same thing about making music. It's pretty rare that I make music and then walk away from that experience being like, that sucks, you know, like that now I feel worse than before. Like it's almost always making me feel better. So I kind of look at it as just a thing. Like even if I don't want to do it, it's a good idea too, because I know it'll make me feel better.
And we had somebody named Seth Godin on this podcast at one point, and he basically wrote a book about just showing up and doing it. And ultimately,
yeah, man, I saw that and I was like, whoa, you got Seth Godin, that's crazy. And then I was like, maybe I could get Seth Godin on my podcast, and I asked him, he was like, nope. But yeah, he I guess like Stephen Pressfield also has a book about that too, right? The War of Art or whatever.
Yes, yeah, and Seth always talks about that Pressfield book.
Yeah, it's a good book. I mean, there's a lot of truth in it, and yeah, he makes a really good point. It's like just show up and the art will get made.
So you bring up Pressfield's book, and for everyone out there listening, this is called The War of Art, and it's a lot about the mental internal conflict of being an artist and the vulnerability that takes. So since you bring that up, Mr. Bill, I'd love to, the phrase "the resistance" that Pressfield brings up.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of talk to me about how what your back and forth is like with that, and ultimately how you see you overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess when he talks about the resistance, it could manifest in however many different ways for different people, right? But for me, it's just like it'll just be excuses as to why I shouldn't be writing music, or why I shouldn't, like, maybe I'll be like, oh, I should take a break from it. Maybe I should be doing this other thing. And quite often that just feels true. Like, maybe I spent like 12 hours in the studio yesterday, and the day before that, it's like, maybe I should take a day off at some point and like do something else. Like maybe, I just moved into this house. I got to set up a bunch of shit. Like maybe I should do that. Other aspects of my life need to be, looked at as well. Obviously, like you can't just write music 24 hours a day. So I mean, to some degree, like the resistance could look like that, right? Like very logical reasons as to why you shouldn't be making art. But if you like totally subscribe as like a hard press fielder, I guess you would say like you should never do that, right? You should just be showing up constantly for the music, just in case the muse comes, man. It's like that. I guess his whole thing like pivots on the fact that making art is like the most important thing ever, right?
As a producer, you've had success that a lot of people dream of, and quote unquote success it's subjective, and it can be like void of meaning in certain contexts. But I'm curious with you, like throughout your career, what brings you the most fulfillment with what you do?
It's a good question. Like just in the music side of things, or just in general in life?
Well, I'd love to hear you answer as a professional producer, but then also super curious about life.
The most fulfilling thing I think is like finishing music and putting it out and having other people have a good experience with that music. I think that's the most fulfilling thing. Or the close second is just finishing a piece of music that I'm really happy with. Those are the two most fulfilling things. In general, in life, the most fulfilling things I've found putting a lot of energy into a relationship that ends up being like a really fulfilling experience for both me and my partner. And I, learn a lot, they learn a lot, like everyone's feeling good. That's pretty fulfilling. Exercise, obviously pretty fulfilling. If I'm like trying to be healthy, going to bed early, living a good lifestyle, all that kind of shit, it's pretty fulfilling. Like basically not just allowing myself to be a fucking piece of shit, like just like making sure I get, 8 hours of sleep a night, cooking for myself rather than ordering Uber Eats every meal, all that kind of shit. Like doing the opposite to that shit is like definitely more fulfilling than that. Yeah, you go down the path of least resistance to try and get to what you think is going to be happiness or contentment the fastest, which is often your brain is like, well, that's just things that have quick release energy, like sugar, caffeine, dopamine inducing things like YouTube, shit like that.
I want to jump to the side a little bit. So in speaking about music, one thing I'm like so interested in, and we talk a lot about on this podcast, is how music even came to be. Like we hear sounds, in nature, but then ultimately there was a drum or something like that. And I'm curious with you as someone who professionally makes music, like what you kind of in your own mind see the origin of music as and its original purpose it served for us.
Well, I think the first drum was the earth, like we were hitting it with our feet, walking like boom, two, so like 1, 2, 1, 2, which is I think why we like 4/4 so much, because we have two legs. And then also I think that, like corroborees, like tribal dance and all that kind of shit, like gathering around as a celebration. I think there's many things that we naturally have done throughout history, and I'm just talking out of my ass here. I'm not a historian or anything, but like I would imagine that there's just a lot of things like through history that we do and have done that are, I suppose, like just a celebration of something, right? Like laughter. That's like a natural response to something. And I imagine like people before we even had language were laughing. and it's almost like a celebration of something just like funny happening or something good happening. You're like, haha, like what the fuck. And I think the same thing with like dance and music. Almost, it's like it just feels like a natural thing that you want to do, like to like let some feeling out. And I guess that's how it came to be. I don't know. It
You at all
definitely, like, the first instrument was our body for sure.
do you at all as you're making music try to think about kind of like the subconscious of listening to music, like how beyond our conscious mind we're going to actually, respond to what we're listening to?
I mean, I don't think as the artist you have that much control over what kind of an experience somebody is going to have with your music. Like, I was told like just a few days ago by a friend that they don't think my music has any emotion in it, right? And to somebody else, like, I've been told by tons of other people that they've had like crazy emotional experiences with my music. And it's like I have no fucking idea like how like what they're going to find to be emotionally like salient and not. That's got to do with them and their history with music and the experiences that they've had with it, and the kind of things that they find interesting auditorily and whatnot. That's got nothing to do with me. Like, all as I can do is make the music. It's them that are going to have the experience with it.
Well, if you made it this far, thank you for listening. Just want to let y'all know we've got these hand-dyed, ice-dyed Weird Music Podcast tees, and we're also going to be making some sweatshirts, so if you'd like one, let us know. We'd love to get you one. Also want to give a big shout out to the geniuses over at Thrax CBD for sponsoring this show with their amazing products. Got a link in the description. Also, big thank you to our sponsor, J&J Distribution, Ohio's premier CBD and Delta 8 wholesale supplier. Retailers, check out their brands Kush Burst, 3Chi THC Edibles, and CBD MD. And also want to give a big thank you to our local print shop, Franklinton Press. If you need any custom merch or custom printing, hit them up. They'll take good care of you. We got links in the description. And yeah, much love, y'all. Now back to the show. What do you think it is about low bass frequencies that can have the effect that they do to have people be so into it?
Well, I think like maybe a lot of it comes from like history of generally like stuff that's bassy means it's pretty big. Like dinosaurs would probably have produced a lot of bass when they're walking around because they're pretty big. A tree falling down, hitting the earth generally produces a lot of bass frequencies, stuff like that. An earthquake probably produces a lot of bass frequencies. It's like generally stuff that is producing like large amounts of bass is either like a giant problem or just like something that you should be in awe of because it's massive. And, I think that's probably why it has that kind of effect on humans maybe.
Well, so I want to pivot a little bit to you as a podcaster, and I know you had the myth, the legend, Duncan Trussell on your show. I enjoyed those couple episodes. I'm curious, like, what the years you've spent podcasting, how you feel like that's helped you grow as a person.
I mean, to me, podcasts are just conversations that have been recorded. Like, I've always had conversations with people. So I do think that carving out time to have like a proper conversation with somebody where you're both not distracted and you're both agreeing to like involve yourself in this conversation is definitely something that we don't do very often these days. I think like quite often conversations outside of podcasting for me are pretty passive. It's either I'm having them through text with somebody and it's like I can asynchronously respond. I don't have to be responding to them in real time. Or if we're talking or whatever, I'll be like, hey, I'm like also doing another thing, but like kind of answering them at the same time or whatever. It's like, I think it's good just, every now and then to have like a focused conversation with somebody where you're both engaged. I think it's healthy to do that. And I think just doing that more often as a person in general is, just I don't know. Yeah, it just seems like a good human thing that you should be doing. And I feel like part of the reason why podcasts are so popular these days is because people don't do that often. And it's almost like people outside who are watching the podcasts, like fans and whatnot, are looking at it like a little bit in shock, being like, what the hell's going on here? Oh my God, like two people having a conversation. Wow, that's crazy. So,
It's like a conversation museum, like
well, it's just
ancient days.
it's like something to be impressed by almost these days, because you're like, well, I haven't seen that happen in a while. Yeah.
Certain podcasts, you want to listen to something that interests you. And, I'm curious with yours, what really sticks out as just being like profound, like that really just was like, wow, for you, some interviews you've done?
That's a good question. The ones that I enjoy the most are usually the ones with audio scientists. Like I just did one with Dr. Mark Bassett, which is not out yet, but it will be out soon. Um, the one with Matt Davis and Anthony Bissett was really cool because like one of them's a small room acoustics designer and the other one's a speaker designer. Just like I really like talking about like science in that way, and the science of what I do is like audio based. So.
If at all possible, I'd love to hear you like in a kind of simplified way, kind of talk about what specific topics from those interviews were just like really interesting for you.
Well, it's hard to say at this point. I don't really specifically remember the Mark Davis and Anthony Bissett one because that was in 2019. But the one I just had with Matt Davis, Mark Bassett was interesting because we were talking about technical ear training, and like he's just designed a piece of software called Frequia that's designed to like train your ear. Basically, it shows you can run your Spotify through it or whatever. You can load an audio file into it or whatever, and then it presents you with a quote unquote question. The question is like a bunch of EQ settings applied to the file, but you can't see what those EQ settings are, and then you have to guess what they are and then submit your response. And the goal is that like it's like supposed to train your ear to become a better mix engineer, right? And the way that he got to this was through like having to do basically a PhD worth of study to try and figure out like whether or not this was even useful to do, and also like the correct way to do it, and so you're not biasing people's training. And over time the app, as far as I know, figures out what you're good at and what you're bad at, and then shows you more of the questions that you're bad at, so you're not wasting time practicing on the shit that you're already good at.
And what is this called?
Frequia. It only runs on Mac though.
So one thing, like, you go to music festivals and some people are, just hanging out, and, from time to time, people have these just like profound cathartic experiences, and music can be really healing for us, even not at a music festival setting, just like listening to it. I'm wondering, if you were to take a guess, what you think it is about music that can be healing?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think again, right, it's got to do with people having their own experience with it. I think like it can have both effects. Like somebody can listen to a piece of music and it can be detrimental to their emotional state. Somebody else can listen to the same piece of music and it can make them feel really good. I think in general, it really just depends on the person's emotional state. It's like music is almost like a drug, like a psychedelic drug, and a psychedelic experience or a psychedelic drug, it can be really comfortable and nice, or it can be really uncomfortable and make you feel all fucked up and crazy, right? So,
would you care to share any stories of your psychedelic experiences with music?
I can't really think of any. Oh, actually, yeah, there's one that comes to mind that's really vivid, which is I was in a warehouse at a warehouse party in it must have been like 2006 or something like that. I was pretty young. And I still suffer from a bit of anxiety here and there, but it was way worse when I was younger. And I went to this warehouse party and there was this dude, I think his name was Mark J, and he was playing vinyl records, and he was playing breakcore, which is just like really intense drum and bass basically, but like with just tons of distortion and sampling and cut up breaks and shit. And on top of that, the vibration from the stage that he was playing on kept jumping the needles out of his vinyls, and there was like dust and shit from the top of the warehouse roof like falling in his fucking vinyls and shit. So it just made like the breakcore even more intense, and the music kept stopping and starting and shit. And I was just like, I just had a full-blown like panic attack. I was like, fuck this, I have to leave. And like I literally just had to leave the warehouse. And I ended up just going, and it was in Newcastle, Australia. So I just ended up going and finding a beach and just sitting on a beach, just like breathing and just like, fuck, I feel like shit after that. And then, yeah, my chest got all tight and shit. That was like the pinnacle of like maybe bad experiences I've had with music in before.
I'd love to hear from you, like in moments where you feel your anxiety stirring up, what kind of self-talk you would hope, like your best self, you would hope you would be able to do to kind of calm yourself down?
Breathing, exercise is the two that help the most. Going for walks, doing cardio, keeping your body healthy, not ingesting too many things like caffeine and whatnot, making sure you get enough sleep. That's all the shit that quells anxiety for me, at least. And the opposite is true, you know, like if I don't sleep at all, drink a shitload of caffeine, don't look after my health, eat like shit, bound to have an anxiety attack somewhere around there.
How would you sum up your musical philosophy?
To me, music is just a bunch of noises that are organized in such a way that sound interesting to any individual, or don't sound interesting. I don't know if that's necessarily important. For me, it is. If you organize a bunch of sounds in a way where I'm like, that's interesting and I like it, that sounds good, that to me is music. And anything goes within those parameters. Like it can be in any note, any amount of, any frequency, any rhythmic arrangement, any melodic arrangement, it doesn't matter. As long as I hear it and I go like, that's sick, I think that's cool, like it sounds good to me, I like it, that to me is music.
If you can open up other producers and musicians' eyes to connecting with more deeply with a specific element of music, whether that's, you know, certain kinds of rhythm, dynamics, space, you know, what might you think that should be?
I think the general traits that like all producers use or could use more of to be the most, let's say, connectable music by the most people would be anything that has a lot of formants in it, aka stuff that sounds vocal. So for instance, like, you know, obviously vocals are the main one there, like pop music has a lot of vocals in it, stuff like that. And people connect to it because obviously everybody, most people have a human voice, and we're all subjected to that from a young age, you know. And so it's something that we're all very familiar with, and familiarity feels comfortable. And I find like electronic musicians who have a lot of very vocal stuff in their production are generally like not necessarily always like super popular, but when I listen to it, I feel like comfortable listening to it. You know, like for instance, Tipper, it's like a lot of his stuff sounds very vocal, and it's like, oh, this sounds like somebody talking almost through a synth. Like it's, yeah, I don't know. I feel
No, that's
like
a great answer. So you know, I've seen IDM across your work, and I'm curious to hear you explain what that is.
Honestly, it's probably not the best term to explain what it is that I'm doing. I mean, the term is intelligent dance music. That's what it stands for. It's kind of a shitty term. I don't think it really makes a lot of sense, but it definitely does describe a branch of music. Like for instance, all of the Aphex Twin, Square Pusher, Venetian snares, all that kind of stuff either falls into two categories, I think. IDM or breakcore, or I suppose a lot of Aphex Twin is also like ambient music. But for me, I don't think like what I'm doing necessarily falls into those same categories. I don't really think my stuff sounds that much like Aphex Twin or Square Pusher. Though I guess like also I don't think down tempo is a good term for what this is either, you know. Like Tipper and a bunch of people surrounding that community call that the same thing that I'm referring to as IDM, down tempo. I call it IDM, even though it's not really that. I guess like I don't know what to call it is the thing, so I just call it IDM. You know, like so what else do you call it? Like I guess you could just call it glitch, but not all of it's glitchy, you know. And then like you could call it like chill out, but not all of it's that chill. Like it's hard to really describe like what it is. So. Oh, there's no real like genre name for it. I feel like maybe electronica or whatever, but what does that even fucking mean? You know? So I just call it IDM. The way I describe it to people when they generally ask like, what is your IDM sets? Like, what's different about that to like a regular Mr. Bill set? Is I just say Mr. Bill sets are pretty much like mostly heavy shit, like most of the dubsteppy, like heavy bass music shit that I write. IDM is just everything else. It's just all the other shit I write. So whatever else falls into those categories.
I'd love to hear you elaborate further on some other specific things you admire about different producers.
I really like Eli Derp right now, and a lot of these like younger dubstep kids like Noir, Zenith, Job, um, just because they're nailing that dubstep sound on like a whole other level. I think like it's like getting they've like taken it, I think, to a new level. Their production's just insanely clean. The sound design is incredibly good. They're all like young, so like they have a shit ton of energy. They're all like 18 and shit, you know, like More Kismet is another one of these kids. It's just they have just like their brains are working on fucking firing on all cylinders, you know, because they're still in that like state where your brain is doing that. I feel like when you hit like 35, or even like, you know, your early 30s or even late 20s, it's like your brain just starts slowing down. And that's just a fact. Like you look at esports, you know, one of the things where your brain has to be firing insanely quickly, and people peter out like in their mid 20s, you know, like the people who are all carving up at like CSGO and shit, like 16 years old. So yeah, I don't know. Then again, I mean, creative work is a little different to maybe like Twitchy based esport kind of shit, but that's just where I where I fall on that one. I guess like all these kids is where I'm looking, because that's where I find the most interesting and crazy shit to be happening.
Can you talk to me about some things you admire about artists that are not like producers?
I definitely am a big fan of just like random bands and stuff. You know, like I really like Hiatus Coyote, like kind of like jazzy and funky and stuff like that. And like Fat Freddy's Drop, I think, is sick, and like just, you know, this kind of funkier sort of stuff. I also like a lot of metal, you know, like Sunk Lotto, Carnival, Cog, Deftones, like all of these old sort of metal bands I'm into. Um, and I guess like what I appreciate about all of it is just, I don't know, it's just musically very different to electronic music. You know, like electronic music is generally like a lot of the time melodically very simple, but sonically very complex. And a lot of this other music is kind of the opposite. It's sonically very simple, but melodically very complex and musically very complex.
I'd love to hear you talk to me about the original reason you like got into music so much that you wanted to devote your life to it.
Yeah, I mean, I just like from a young age always really liked music, and I always like messing around with it. Ever since like I was really young, my mum got me a keyboard, and I just play around the keyboard, and it was just like I just found it fun. And then when I was slightly older, I had a friend who like had an acoustic guitar, and he was like kind of learning how to do it. And I remember like watching him play it, it would like make me laugh, because I was like, this is so sick. Like the fact that you can just be like playing a piece of music right now, like that's so cool. Um, so I like wanted to do that too. So I started learning guitar and then went down this whole rabbit hole. Yeah.
I'd love to hear you talk about any specific books that you've read over the course of your life. You know, you mentioned The War of Art, but beyond that, like any books that have been especially impactful for you.
Oh man, I need to read way more. I have like a pile of books that I need to read, to be honest. I listen to a lot of like audiobooks and podcasts more so than read, to be honest. um, the one that I read the most recently that was pretty impactful was The Body by Bill Bryson. That was a good one. There's just a lot of weird facts in there. Like, for instance, you can only see 1/6 of your eyeball. If you pull your lungs out of your body and stretch them out, they'll cover a tennis court. Um, the way that they used to check blood pressure is they just put a pipe in your arm and just see like how high the blood went, and like just random shit like that. I was like, what the fuck? Like, it's just a bunch of crazy random facts. And I was like, that's kind of all this shit is like pretty mind blowing, you know? So that's the one that like kind of comes up as, you know, the one that's been like the most, it's affected me the most recently. It's just all these random facts.
If you had to recommend 3 songs to pick for someone to get to know you, what songs would you pick?
Pleasure Seeker, Eskimo, and Screening.
What would you say would be your dream collaboration right now with a vocalist, musician, or another producer?
That's a good question. Probably with someone like Tipper, I would say. Yep.
And so you've done some film scoring, correct?
Yeah, I scored the movie Mum and Dad with Nicolas Cage and Selma Blair.
Damn. How is that different? Creating music for a movie versus creating music, just your own music. And also like, how is that similar too?
Well, when you're creating your own music, or for me, it's like I'm just creating what sounds good and just like making a vibe happen, right? Just whatever I want to do, anything kind of goes. But when I'm making something for a film, it's like you're dictating what's going on the screen, you know, like you're using tension and release to let the viewer know that something's about to happen, or maybe you're like trying to make seem like something's about to happen, but then something doesn't happen. Like for instance, there's a part of the movie where we use a riser, and it's like all this tension is about to happen, and this girl puts her hand in a blender, and you think that the blender's going to turn on and like chew her hand up, but then it doesn't, right? It's like it's shit like that. Like, you know, it's like a whole different process of like composition in that way. Whereas writing music just for yourself, it's kind of like you can just do whatever.
Mr. Bill, man, thank you so much for joining me. Everyone out there listening, if you haven't yet, check him out on streaming platforms and socials at Mr. Bill's Tunes. And yeah, also all kinds of stuff on his website, MrBillsTunes.com. Link in the description. So great to talk to you, man. I want to leave it in one final question. If there's a takeaway, a lesson, a mantra about you, about what you're all about what you've learned throughout your life, like what would you say that one sentence might be?
Oh shit, that's a good question. So many, and also I can't think of any. I don't know, man. I guess just do what you know is the right thing to do, and don't be a shit cunt.
I love it. Mr. Bill, everyone.
Cool. All right. Thanks, man.